I knew something was wrong before I even reached the gate. The silence hit first. No engines. No laughter. No dust hanging in the air. Just silence. The kind that makes your stomach tighten before your brain catches up. Then I rounded the corner and saw it. 15 years of memories had been flattened into a patch of dead brown earth. The dirt oval that sat behind my property was gone. Every turn, every jump, every tire barrier, every homemade improvement we'd built over the years had been crushed beneath bulldozer tracks. For a second, I just stood there staring, honestly wondering if I was somehow looking at the wrong place. But I wasn't. This was Willow Creek Raceway. Or at least it had been. My name is Travis Monroe, and for most of my adult life that track had been part of my weekends. It wasn't some professional racing facility. It was better than that. It belonged to regular people. Kids learned how to handle their first dirt bikes there. Retired mechanics spent Saturdays arguing over carburetors and suspension setups. Fathers brought their sons. Mothers brought lawn chairs and coolers. Nobody got rich from that place. Nobody expected to. It was community. The kind of thing developers put on brochures but rarely understand. Across the fence, towering above the destruction, stood the reason all of this had happened. Iron Summit Adventure Park. $100 million project spread across hundreds of acres. Roller coaster supports stretched into the sky like giant steel skeletons. Construction cranes swung overhead. Massive banners promised unforgettable experiences, premium family entertainment, and world-class attractions. Apparently, world-class attractions didn't include a dirt racetrack full of local families. I was still staring at the damage when a construction truck rolled up nearby. A man stepped out wearing a white hard hat and mirrored sunglasses. He walked toward me with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in his life. "You Travis?" he asked. "Yeah." He glanced toward the flattened track and shrugged. Actually shrugged. Land leveling project. Future parking expansion. I looked at him, waiting for the part where he explained the mistake. The apology. The misunderstanding. It never came. "You demolished private property," I said. He laughed lightly. Not nervous laughter. Dismissive laughter. Recreational dirt areas reduce premium perception. Corporate wanted a cleaner visual corridor leading into the park. I remember blinking a few times because my brain genuinely struggled to process what he'd just said. Premium perception. That was his explanation. 15 years of local history wiped out because somebody in a boardroom thought dirt racing looked cheap. "You didn't contact anyone?" I asked. "Didn't compensate anyone?" He spread his hands. "Above my pay grade." Then he turned and walked away. Just like that. I wish I could tell you I immediately came up with some brilliant plan. I didn't. I was angry. That's all. The kind of anger that sits heavy in your chest and follows you home. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around sunset, I grabbed a flashlight and started walking the construction roads surrounding the park. I wasn't looking for revenge yet. Honestly, I think I was just trying to understand how people could erase something so important and not think twice about it. The new access road they had built cut directly through what used to be Turn 3 and Turn 4. Seeing that felt like somebody had carved their initials into a gravestone. I followed the road downhill until it connected with the park's main traffic system. That's when I noticed something interesting. The exit route. Iron Summit was designed to handle enormous crowds. Concerts. Fireworks shows. Holiday events. Thousands of vehicles moving at once. The main exit ramp stretched nearly half a mile before connecting with the county highway. Wide lanes. Multiple merge points. Expensive engineering. Everything looked familiar somehow. I stood there watching workers install lighting poles, and suddenly an old memory floated back into my head. Years earlier, before construction even began, there had been public hearings. Endless meetings. Environmental reviews. Traffic studies. Emergency management plans. Most people stopped paying attention after a while. I hadn't. Mostly because my family owned land bordering part of the development area. I remembered one specific meeting where county officials raised concerns about evacuation routes. The developers had struggled for months trying to secure final operating approval. Emergency services wanted multiple backup exits. Fire officials wanted overflow dispersal routes. Transportation planners demanded contingency access if the primary roads became blocked. Then something clicked. Not a full idea, just a tiny spark. One particular route. One narrow strip of land. A temporary agreement signed years ago. I stopped walking. My heart started beating faster. because suddenly I wasn't thinking about what they had destroyed. I was thinking about what they desperately needed and what they might have forgotten. When I got home, I went straight into my workshop and stared at an old gray filing cabinet sitting beneath decades of racing trophies, spare parts, and dusty photographs. Somewhere inside that cabinet was a piece of paper nobody had thought about in years. And for the first time since the bulldozers arrived, I smiled. The next morning, I was in that workshop before sunrise. The coffee hadn't even finished brewing when I started pulling open filing cabinet drawers. Most people would have thrown that thing away years ago. The metal was scratched, one handle was bent, and every drawer smelled faintly like motor oil and old paper. But my father never threw documents away, and neither did I. If there was a record of something, chances were it was still sitting in there somewhere. For nearly 2 hours I dug through permits, property surveys, maintenance receipts, insurance paperwork, and photographs dating back to the early 90s. Then I found it. A thin manila folder wedged between a drainage easement agreement and an old utility map. My pulse immediately jumped. Across the front were the words Temporary Access and Emergency Traffic Accommodation Agreement. I sat down and carefully opened it. The further I read, the harder it became to stop smiling. Years earlier, during the county approval process, Iron Summit's developers had been desperate. Their original traffic plan failed multiple safety reviews because the property lacked enough emergency dispersal routes. The solution had been a temporary agreement allowing a section of my family's land to function as a backup exit corridor during major events, emergencies, or traffic overflow situations. The key word was temporary. Not permanent. Not transferable. Temporary. The agreement included renewal requirements, compensation provisions, and most importantly, termination rights. Those rights belonged entirely to the landowner. Us. Apparently nobody at Iron Summit had bothered checking whether the agreement had ever been renewed properly after ownership changes and corporate restructuring. They had simply continued operating as if the route belonged to them. The more I reviewed the paperwork, the more obvious it became. Their lawyers had forgotten about it years ago. Their executives probably didn't even know it existed. Yet one of the most important traffic safety components of their entire operation rested on that forgotten document. I spent the rest of the morning meeting with a local attorney named Rebecca Holloway. Rebecca wasn't flashy. She drove an old pickup truck and kept stacks of files everywhere in her office. But she understood property law better than anyone in the county. After reading the agreement twice, she leaned back in her chair and smiled. "Well," she said, tapping the document, "somebody at Iron Summit is about to have a very bad month." I laughed. "It's solid. It's better than solid. They should have renewed this years ago." "Can I terminate?" "Absolutely." Immediately, she looked at me over her glasses. "Travis, if everything in these records checks out, you can terminate before lunch." There was no dramatic confrontation, no angry speeches, no social media campaign. I simply signed paperwork. Rebecca filed notices with the county. Copies were sent to transportation officials, emergency services coordinators, and the park's legal department. Then I went home and waited. The first sign that something was happening came 3 days later. I drove past the property and noticed workers installing temporary barricades along the emergency exit corridor. Bright orange barriers stretched across sections of roadway that had been considered operational only a week earlier. Traffic engineers stood around reviewing maps. Several county vehicles were parked near the entrance. By the end of the week, things got even more interesting. Iron Summit held a soft opening event before their grand launch. Thousands of visitors showed up. Families packed the parking lots. Social media influencers posted videos from the rides. Management probably thought everything was going smoothly. Then closing time arrived. Without the backup route available, every vehicle had to funnel through a single primary exit system. At first traffic slowed. Then it stalled. Then it completely collapsed. I watched part of it from a hill overlooking the property. It looked like somebody had poured thousands of cars into a funnel designed for half the volume. Brake lights stretched for miles. Parents sat trapped in vehicles with exhausted children. Tempers exploded. Car horns echoed across the valley. What should have been a 20-minute departure turned into 2-hour gridlock. The next morning, online reviews started appearing everywhere. 1-star ratings. Complaints about traffic nightmares. Families saying they spent more time leaving the park than enjoying it. Video clips of endless vehicle lines spread across local community groups. News stations started asking questions. Then the fire department became involved. That was when the situation shifted from inconvenience to crisis. Emergency management officials wanted updated evacuation projections. Fire inspectors requested documentation regarding traffic dispersal capacity. Transportation planners questioned whether crowd management assumptions remained valid under current operating conditions. Investors began noticing the conversation. Vendors noticed. Insurance companies noticed. Everybody noticed. 2 weeks after the termination notice, rumors were flying everywhere. Some employees claimed the park was losing hundreds of thousands of dollars in projected revenue. Others said investors were delaying additional funding until traffic concerns were resolved. One local reporter even referred to the situation as the bottleneck problem. Through all of it, I stayed quiet. People in town knew what had happened to the racetrack. Word travels fast in small communities. Every grocery store trip turned into a conversation. Every gas station stop became a discussion about the park. Some people thought I was justified. Others thought I should have just accepted compensation and moved on. Honestly, I understood both sides. The thing was, this had never been about money. It was about respect. They didn't destroy the racetrack because they needed the land. They destroyed it because they believed nobody important would push back. They assumed local traditions were disposable. They assumed community spaces could simply be erased if a corporate presentation demanded it. What happened next proved how wrong that assumption was. One Thursday afternoon, a black SUV pulled into my driveway. Not a fleet of lawyers. Not a public relations team. Just one vehicle. A man stepped out wearing jeans and a button-down shirt. He looked exhausted. Not physically exhausted. Financially exhausted. Bureaucratically exhausted. Spiritually exhausted. Like somebody who hadn't slept properly in weeks. I recognized him immediately from newspaper interviews. Ethan Mercer, executive director of Iron Summit Adventure Park. He walked up to the porch while I sat in an old rocking chair drinking iced tea. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he looked toward the distant construction site and sighed. "You've caused me a lot of problems, Travis." I couldn't help laughing. "That's funny." I was about to say the same thing. A tiny smile appeared on his face before disappearing again. He sat down across from me and rubbed his forehead. "Look," he said quietly, "I'm not here to argue." "Good. I'm here because we're running out of options." For the next hour, he explained everything. Investor pressure, safety reviews, traffic concerns, public relations damage, vendor complaints, operational delays. Every problem pointed back to the same missing corridor. Every meeting eventually circled back to the same question. How do we get that route reopened? Finally, he looked directly at me. "What do you want?" It was the first time anyone from that company had asked that question. Not demanded, not assumed, asked. I let the silence hang for a few seconds. Then I stood up and pointed toward the empty patch of earth where Willow Creek Raceway used to sit. "You see that?" He nodded. "That's where we start." And for the first time since this whole mess began, the balance of power had completely shifted. Ethan followed my gaze toward the empty field, and for a moment neither of us said anything. The late afternoon sun was dropping behind the hills, casting long shadows across the scar that used to be Willow Creek Raceway. From where we sat, you could almost imagine the old track was still there. Almost. Then the silence broke. "Tell me what you need," he said. Not what I wanted. What I needed. That difference mattered. I looked at him and said, "First, the racetrack gets rebuilt exactly where it was. Same layout, same footprint, same access. Second, your company funds proper safety barriers, drainage improvements, and spectator areas. Third, the county records permanent recreational access protections so nobody can erase it again 5 years from now when another executive wants a prettier brochure." Ethan nodded slowly, listening. Then I gave him the last condition, the one that made him lean back in his chair. "And if Iron Summit wants that emergency exit corridor back, there's going to be a permanent easement agreement with annual compensation." He stared at me for several seconds. I could practically hear the calculations happening inside his head. Legal costs, delays, investor pressure, safety compliance issues, lost revenue, public relations damage. Finally he asked, "That's it?" I almost laughed. "That's it." He extended his hand before I even finished my tea. Deal. The speed of that handshake told me everything I needed to know about how desperate the situation had become. Over the next few months, something happened that nobody in town expected. Construction crews returned to the racetrack property. But this time, they weren't carrying demolition equipment. They were rebuilding. The same company that had flattened 15 years of memories was now spending a small fortune putting them back together. New clay was hauled in. Fresh barriers were installed. Drainage systems were upgraded. The track's surface was laser-leveled. They even added lighting and safety features we could never have afforded on our own. Every week, more people showed up to watch the progress. Retired mechanics leaned against pickup trucks offering unsolicited advice. Kids rode bicycles around the perimeter. Local business owners donated materials. What started as a rebuilding project slowly turned into a community celebration. Then opening day arrived. I'll never forget it. Engines fired up for the first time just after 9 in the morning. The sound rolled across the valley exactly the way it had for years. Parents unfolded lawn chairs. Families filled the bleachers. Old racers who hadn't touched their bikes in years suddenly found excuses to come back. At one point I stood near turn 2 watching a group of young riders take practice laps and realized something unexpected. The track looked better than it ever had before. Not because of the money. Because people now understood its value. Sometimes you don't realize how much something matters until somebody tries to take it away. A few months later Iron Summit finally held its official grand opening. Their traffic systems worked. Their emergency compliance issues were resolved. Their investors calmed down. The park became successful. And honestly, I never wanted it to fail. That's the part some people still don't understand. This was never about destroying a business. It was about reminding a powerful company that communities aren't obstacles on a map. They aren't empty spaces waiting to be optimized. They're made of real people whose memories and traditions have value, whether a marketing department recognizes that or not. Every now and then I still run into Ethan Mercer, usually at county events or local fundraisers. One time he looked at the racetrack, shook his head, and said, "You know, that might have been the most expensive parking expansion decision in state history." I laughed and told him he wasn't wrong. Looking back now, I think the strangest part is how close they came to avoiding all of it. One phone call, one meeting, one conversation with the community before sending in bulldozers. That's all it would have taken. Instead, they learned a lesson that cost them months of delays, piles of legal fees, and a lot of sleepless nights. The racetrack is still there today. The park is still there too. Kids still learn how to ride. Families still gather on weekends. And every time traffic flows smoothly out of Iron Summit's exit corridor, a small annual payment arrives exactly on schedule. Not because somebody was forced into submission. Because a signed agreement finally reflects reality. Respect goes both ways. Now here's the question I want to leave with you. If you were in my position, would you have done the same thing? Was it fair to use a forgotten legal agreement after they destroyed something important to the community, or should I have taken the high road and let it go? I know people still disagree about that, and honestly, maybe that's what makes this story interesting. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Who was right? Who was wrong? And where do you think the line is between standing up for your community and taking revenge? If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who loves seeing powerful people finally face the consequences of their own decisions. Until next time, take care.